Welcome back. You're watching South Africa Tonight here on ENCA. Now, during his address last night, President Cyril Ramaphosa assured the country more funds will be allocated to the fight against crime. Ramaphosa says 10,000 new police officers will be recruited and trained this year. The president also promised more funding for the National Prosecuting Authority and Special Investigating Unit. Let's unpack this further. I'm joined by independent researcher at the Institute of Security Studies, David Bruce. Thank you so much for your time. Mr. Bruce, we do appreciate it. I must say that it wasn't very inspiring to hear what the president had to say when it comes to fighting crime. We know that especially women and children in this country are subjected to the most brutal murders and crimes every single day. And perhaps something more needed to be done or said from the president. What's your assessment of what he said about crime?
Hi. Well, in some respects, I think particularly relative to some of what he said in previous years, the speech was at least quite interesting. The one thing was that he committed to embarking on a process of reform to improve the effectiveness of the fight against crime. And so at least, that suggests that isn't something that they've talked about before. It is quite a type of vague commitment, but it suggests at least that they might be considering trying to do things, differently in some way. And it would be worthwhile if we could get more clarity from them about, what it is exactly, or whether there is in fact more detail about what they mean about that.
Certainly. So you say it was kind of a vague commitment, things will be done in a different kind of way. What way would you suggest things need to be done to tackle crime in this country? Every 3 months or so we get the crime statistics, and they're more tragic and horrifying each time. How do we address this problem? Do we need more resources? Do we need a different kind of technology to tackle crime? What exactly is needed, and what should the president understand is needed to fight crime in South Africa?
Well, obviously there's a detailed answer that's called for in response to that question, but the one simple and straightforward answer that I can give you in response to your question is just this, that if one looks at the speech and one looks at the general pronouncements that are made, either, for instance, by the president or the minister of police about what their priorities are in terms of addressing crime, it's consistently there isn't really a coherent statement of what their priorities are. So you'll have various things thrown into, speeches in a fairly, kind of ad hoc type of way. They repeatedly do mention things like gender-based violence, crimes against children. The one thing that they've started focusing on a lot more recently are things like infrastructure-related crime. And I think we would all agree that those things should be regarded as a priority. But, the one thing is that we, seriously need a considered and purposeful response from government to the overall problem of violent crime. In 2019, President Ramaphosa made a somewhat rash commitment to halve violent crime within a decade. And the latest statistics instead that indicate that instead of, for instance, particularly in relation to murder statistics, that instead of murder going down, in fact, the levels of the per capita rates of murder that we have in South Africa at the moment are higher than any of the rates that we've seen for something like 20 years. And reducing rates of murder should certainly be a central focus of anything that that a government that is serious about responding to crime it should be central to its list of priorities. So on a very simple level, we need governments to say that these are our 5 priorities, these are our 6 priorities, whatever it is. But the way in which priorities are presented government's current policy statement on these issues is itself lacking in sufficient clarity.
Just lastly, David, I want to ask you about the issue around the police ministry. The police minister, the police commissioner, do you think that they are the right people for the job? And I ask this in the context of many are saying that the police minister oftentimes is out of touch with the realities of what's really going on and the actual crimes on the ground. You know, often you see him arriving after a crime or at a particular event or whatever it might be. But is this really the solution? Is it really tackling crime?
Okay, I mean, I think that, you know, if I was to put forward a list of criticisms of the Minister of Police, the idea that he's out of touch wouldn't necessarily be at the top of my list of criticisms. But what I would say is, you know, to refer back to this point about what the President referred to in his speech, is about embarking on a process of reform to improve the effectiveness of our fight against crime. And so that what that calls for is quite a considered approach to how to strengthen the policing system. And, you know, that calls for a type of serious engagement with questions about policing policy. And, you know, if I were to criticize the minister, it would be on this point that, you know, I think to some extent, you know, there is some level of seriousness on his part about at least, you know, on the ground engagement with crime. But, you know, on the question, on the issue of you know, purposeful response to strengthening the policing system, I don't think we've really seen anything of that kind coming from him. And, you know, I would raise questions about whether anything of that kind is possible while he is still in you know, government's driving seat in relation to policing.
Certainly. I think a lot more needs to be done and a lot more resources on the ground. But thank you so much for your time this evening. We do appreciate it. That was David Bruce, who's the independent researcher at the Institute of Security Studies.